But my man is here. I am joined with Arnaud Develay. Arnaud Develay is an author, political analyst, and international lawyer specializing in international criminal law. His book, Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of America's Political Consensus. Arnaud, what you doing, man? How you doing? You doing okay today?
I'm doing fine, Jamal. How are you? I understand you're under the weather.
A little bit. Yeah, I'm dragging a bit of ass, but that's okay. That's okay. It happens. I'm just the man. Just the man. There's this movie, Beekeeper. Look, I am one of those people that get enamored by, I guess, not really esoteric concepts. It's these concepts of what it means to be a person, what it means to be a man. It's kind of existentialism, and how man could transcend himself when man takes on the role of something else. And the guy was in a fight with a beekeeper, and he says, "You're just the man." It's like, and I love the fact that he had to say it. You're just the man. Arnaud, there is an article that you sent me, and I'm so glad you sent me this because I responded to a post on my comment section because I read my comments. I disregard the ones that I think are nonsense, but the ones that I think are legit, I will respond to. And the end of international law, guess Arnaud Develay. Why the reason why I thought this was so timely was because I just responded to the guy who said to me, Jamal, don't be a nihilist. International law is a real thing. Just because it's being flagrantly violated constantly and always doesn't mean it's not a real thing. And my thing then was kind of like, dude, your comment kind of makes my point, right? Like if you're saying that this thing that is supposed to be real, there's a wall there, and yet people are walking through it. Okay, but if you can walk through it, is it really a wall? Or is it something else? I'm going to let you hit that because my argument is there is no such thing as international law. I want to get to Russia, but I want to get to this first because I'm super curious about this conversation. I'm going to shut up. I'm going to let you make your argument to me why there is international law. I'm going to sit here quiet as a button, and I'm going to listen to that argument, and I will respond after. But give me your thoughts. For someone like me, who apparently is a nihilist, who said there is no Leviathan, there is no international law, that there is nothing above states, tell me why I am wrong in this.
Well, you're starting really strong here. Let's put it this way. When you talk about international law, obviously you're talking about the ability for sovereign states to somehow cohabitate among each other to the extent that their sovereignty is not infringed upon. I guess that's the first. If we go back to Grotius in the 16th century, this idea that there's an international system, whether you call it the Westphalian system or the unipolar moment, which is almost, when you look at it on the long term perspective, is almost like an anomaly. Most of the time, you have competing states, and to the extent they compete, there are rules within which the competition is allowed to take place. Otherwise, the competition cannot take place. It cannot be a zero-sum game, as it were. I'm not going to discuss the international private law, anything, and there are treaties bearing, for instance, on international family law, if you want to take an example as such. So international law in that sense here is perfectly viable. Decisions made in the context of divorces or child custody will be enforced from state to the extent any given state has signed and ratified the treaty. Same thing with the WTO, anything dealing with contractual law, international business, you have supranational rules. So international law works there. I guess what we are talking about here when we wonder whether or not there is international law, or if whether international law per se is real as a thing, we're talking about international public law, i.e. the relationship as in between nation states. And I would argue that it does exist and it has existed although it's always conditioned to its implementation and its observance. Most of the time, when we are in an ascending phase, international law appears to someone work when it's implemented by powerful states, because powerful states, by virtue of their power, compel other states of lesser reach, lesser radiation, lesser influence to play along with the rules. So you have this kind of unstated rules, which we tend to call customary international law. They are not necessarily enshrined and crystallized in a positive law like treaty, for instance, or UN Charter per se. But they are rules that basically everybody abides, because if somebody starts going off the deep end on a certain thematic, then it creates a precedent which benefits no one. So there is something as international law. It's just, again, that, and I'm trying to be as profane as can be, so that people who are listening to us can somehow wrap their mind around it. And we're not here to do like a magistral courses or lecture on it, but the idea is that it is an elastic concept, and international law per se only comes into play or into sight if you look at the long term. Decisions, practices, failures will be somehow incorporated, sometimes over centuries, and by then it will become something that is strictly prohibited. If I take, for example, what happened in Baghdad in 2005, 2006, with the so-called trial of the former Iraqi head of state. In that particular context, in as far as the concept of international criminal justice is concerned, international criminal law, I should be more precise here, the concept of fair trial can obviously not be considered viable when such a venue is administered essentially by an occupying army. And so, to the extent we knew the tensions were ripe, that the communities making up Iraq, modern Iraq, were at each other's throat, the very fact of holding such a highly emotionally charged proceeding in such a context, in and of itself, I'm not going to even consider what constitutes a fair trial. If we look at the provisions in Article 14 of the ICCPR, or Article 10 and 11 of the International Declaration on Human Rights, Universal Declaration on Human Rights, or any kind of regional body equivalent of those provisions. The fact remains that you cannot possibly conceive holding a trial in a country that is just, well, that is still mired in conflict, after 30 years of a part of that population embodied in or incarnated through the defendants, in a context where everybody is seeking, first and foremost, vengeance, revenge, blood. So that's a concept that hopefully, has been integrated now, in as far as the international criminal system is concerned. If you have to ask for a relocation of the trial to another venue, I don't think it will meet any opposition. But we had to go through this so that the point could be made. And it's been 20 years. And one at the time, a lot of people were trying to validate retroactively an illegal invasion predicated on an illegal, acting without the purview of the Security Council, and certainly not within the purview of Article 51. Everything that basically flowed out of this illegal invasion is illegal. That's the other point as well, is that the establishment of the Supreme Iraqi Tribunal is an illegality because it flows from the illegal invasion. In American US doctrine, it refers to the fruit of the poisonous tree. So you cannot have, to begin with, and when we're talking about fair trial, if we zoom out and we talk about the establishment of this so-called international tribunal, it makes no sense because it's predicated on an illegal act. You see, so all those things are pretty much integrated now. They were decried at the time by experts from the International Law Commission, the special rapporteurs, the General Secretary of the United Nations himself came out in criticism of what was going on. Then even profane people like John Burns from the New York Times, was wondering what the hell is this masquerade going on here. So we can now take it for granted after 20 years, a lot of articles have been written on the issue, notwithstanding whether or not the defendant had to account for some of the most heinous acts, allegedly committed. But the problem is we never got to even 10% of what he is alleged to have committed during the 30 years he was in charge. We basically settled on a very minute trial dealing with attempted assassination on this person in 1982 in a border town with Iran while the two countries were at war. There was an attempt on his life. Some of the people were identified, arrested, tried. Whether they were tried in a fairly fashion, that's another story. But the fact is, there were decisions, judicial decisions. And as the head of state under the Iraqi constitution, since the penalty of death applied to the crimes that were those people were charged with, he basically executed his duty as head of state by signing the execution orders. But we never got into, for instance, the campaign against the Kurds. We never got into the reprisal against the Shia population in the south following Iraqi the Desert Storm war. We never got into the gas attacks on the Al-Abja. So there's a lot of things we never got into. We never got into the Anfal campaign. And why was that? Because we knew that if this guy was allowed to speak about what he knew and with whom he worked who facilitated, those actions, who equipped him, who financed him, that would have created a major international embarrassment for the United States. So just to say that, a trial which does not respect the right to the defense team, the right of the defendant, which does not address the right of the victims, because again, we never got into remotely what had been used as justification for the establishment of the tribunal to begin with. All this in a context where the country is about to explode for at least the next 10, 15 years in a major, nasty civil war. Just to give you an example of this, the day of execution was chosen to coincide with the holiest day in Sunni Islam. So it was all they were trying to inflame tensions to such a degree that intra-religious civil war was inevitable from that point on. So, but basically, if we come back to what I was saying, as far as international norms are concerned, specifically applied to international criminal justice, you cannot have a trial in a jurisdiction established itself out of an illegal act, deriving out of an illegal act, bearing on judging a head of state for anything but what you justified the establishment of this jurisdiction to begin with, and in such a context where basically the country is about to, is still emotionally so charged, bearing on what this person represented for a significant chunk of the population, and expect to have decorum and respects for the defendant's rights, short of frontier justice. This is what you have to do: is you have to relocate. At the minima, they should have accepted to relocate, and there were alternatives available to relocate the proceedings. Now, for political reason, this was never even entertained a second. So the idea is that over time, yes, go ahead.
Just interrupt real quick. Do you believe that with the political pressure that was going to be applied in that trial, just use this as an example, since this is the example you're using, that the result would have been different. Because look, they're going after people who were, the US had put pressure on the ICC to put an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin.
Yes.
Because
Right.
Putin was taking kids out of war zones. Okay, that's pretty wild, right? By the same token, the ICC was shamed into finally going after Netanyahu, and finally shamed into going after, what's it, Gallant, I believe. But let's be honest, they could have also went after the entirety of the US state. They could have went after Joe Biden. They could have went after Donald Trump. They could have went after all of these people. They didn't do that, though. I guess I'm saying the political pressure that is typically applied, even with the OPCW going into Syria, these were international bodies that were used for purely political machinations to go after enemies of, let's say, the West and the US. Even the IAEA, when they bombed Iran's nuclear facility, a violation of international law, again, another one, what happened? You got the IAEA very quiet, not saying much of anything. You got the European powers that effectively attacked Iran, despite the fact that Iran was the one that was ultimately attacked. I'm saying with that level of political clout, how could any notion of international law, even if it's from the standpoint of a law or of a trial, how could it ever be fair?
Yeah, but you're using the argument of throwing the baby with the water of the bath here. It's not
No,
because
I'm not.
some of the,
No, go ahead.
let's say, and we have to be cautious here, but in as far as the alleged lack of impartiality of someone like Rafael Grossi is concerned, since specifically you're alluding to him.
Alleged? Alleged?
Well, I mean,
would you like me
he
to play
hasn't.
you the French guy
Yeah,
who was like, well, we don't know where the weapons are because the IAEA is not in it's not in Iran.
until he has to face an internal administrative procedure, and those allegations, as it were, are confirmed. We have to say alleged. That's called the presumption of innocence, right? You were presumed innocent. See, that's the
I don't
concept here.
presume you're
We have to
innocent.
be.
I'm
We
not in
have
the court
to.
of law.
We have
I'm
to be
pointing out
precise.
I'm pointing out that the French guy, I could show you the clip when they asked him, do you know where Iran has the nuclear materials? And he says, well, I don't know because the IAEA is no longer in Iran, meaning they are not telling us, so we don't know, which means that the allegations were correct, that the IAEA was dispensing that information out to various other people. But okay, we can say allege. We can say allege. We can say allege.
Well, because you cannot paint the whole agency in the same stroke as you would its director, is what I'm saying. The
He runs
agency in
the
and of
agency.
itself,
He runs the
yeah,
agency.
well, he runs it, but there was someone before him who ran the agency by the name of Mohammed Al-Baradei, and he did an excellent job in trying to debunk what the US was talking about in as far as Iraq's alleged nuclear capabilities. Same thing with the OPCW. Bustani was somewhat of a decent man who tried to acquit himself of his job responsibilities
Yeah.
until he was threatened, and he and his family, by the way, by John Bolton. And they put somebody more malleable, as Joe Biden was fond of saying when talking about the general prosecutor of Ukraine, someone solid that we can work with. But this does not, in and of itself, invalidate the structures that have been put in place. The problem is, as you say, and this is something that deals again with the unipolar moment, because those things could not have been made possible if not for the unipolar moment. So we are now dealing with the direct consequences of the unipolar moment, which is coming to a close, and thanks God for that. We need to, realign and have a rebalancing of things, and then international law and its instrumentalities will, reintegrate the legitimacy that they should have kept all along.
What I need you to explain to me is that law.
But it's a political process. It's a political process. It's
fair enough.
Yes, it is. It's power politics, and you have to,
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, Well, the law, the international law, in that sense, and I guess this is what we are both alluding to. It's the result of a delicate balance of the means to enforce one's interest, in the sense that there is a consensus that emerges, and then over time, this consensus solidifies and becomes something that nobody dares to contest. But when you have a lack of balance, like we've had the last 30 years, international law, obviously, it takes two to tango, in other words,
Yes.
uh, this is the concept. It's all about, it's the laws of nature. That's why we created initially at the level of the state, the nation state, the monopoly of violence. The notion that, if there's not one sole authority with the monopoly of violence, i.e. the state, we go back to a man is a wolf for man, right? This kind of
Right.
the state, the original state of nature, complete
So who has the
anarchy. And
monopoly of balance on the international stage? That could
well,
enact.
technically, everybody in a way, and that's the concept when we look at the UN more specifically, is every member state at the UN, when it becomes a UN member state, has to somehow surrender a modicum of its sovereignty towards this organization, so that the organization can have the legitimacy to act on their behalf. That's how it
Yeah,
works.
but that's not the way it works. That's the way they say it works. There's a difference, and that's kind of what I'm getting at. The moment that you have, Superman, is Superman ever? Superman has to allow himself to subject himself to law. He is not subjected to law. He is Superman, meaning there's no way that the U.S. or any other country in the world can put any kind of law on Superman because he's Superman. And I'm making the point of saying that the U.S., Russia, China, these are supermen in a world that can come up with any law that they want. All things being equal, none of these countries have to acknowledge or abide by those laws. And if that is true, meaning there is no Leviathan, there's no hegemon, there's nothing above any of these states that could implement or force them to accept law, then is it really a law? That's what I'm getting at. Like laws in a normal sense parlance of the word and the term that we use it. If I don't pay my taxes, there's going to be a man that comes to my house that can beat me up and take me to jail. He has the disposition, the monopoly of force. That doesn't exist on an international level. You just have a law of the jungle where they trying to impart laws on these countries that don't have to follow them at all. And I'm saying if they don't have to follow them, why are we pretending that they exist?
Well, you're alluding to one of the core principles in the UN Charter, which is the respect for national sovereignty. So, unless the country at issue is caught committing, youth organs violations, and even then, as we've seen with the event in the last 2 years, it doesn't mean that we're going to have a UN mandated coalition, put together to go after that state.
Right.
But the idea is basically that you should obey certain norms, because if you don't obey them to the extent you're going to, it's all cycles. A state may be powerful today and may not become as powerful over time, in such a respect that once that state is not able to prance around, as it were, and ignore laws, it will be suffering, inversely, proportionally inversely, the way he was bullying the others. See, the wheel turns. This is also, what we know about the international relation over the long run. So it behooves you to act in a way that does not expose you one day to being subjected to the illegality that you are advocating now on the premise of your raw power. You understand?
Arno, come on. Come on.
Well,
You
but look at
know that
history. That's the way it's been.
no, that they don't think that way. Look, that may be true.
Yeah, because they
In
don't think in the
reality,
long term.
yes, that may be
But
true
look,
in the
you
long
have to
term.
study,
That is not the way
or
countries behave.
just observe the long term. Observe the long term.
But that is not the way people
Observe the
behave.
internet.
Like meaning people as
But
human beings, it is better for us. Like meaning it is good that we don't kill because I don't want to be killed, right? As a human being. I don't want people eating human beings. So, let's make a law against eating human beings. We can kind of agree upon that law. I think rape is bad. Rape is obviously cancerous to society. So let's not do it. Meaning there's certain things that, yes, we agree upon as human beings of saying, hey, this is cancerous to our way of relating to one another.
Sure.
Sociopaths don't care. Like sociopaths don't care about that stuff. The United States are full of monsters. John Bolton famously doesn't believe in missile treaties and those type of things because from his point of view, we are primary. We are the greatest country on the planet. We're the strongest country on the planet. And any rule that we make
For
with
now.
another country. Well, his point of view is any rule that we make weakens us because we can, meaning we can put stuff in space you can't, so let's do it. We can do whatever you can't, so let's do it. Meaning he believes that any rule is a restraint on the US power. That's his point of view. He's a sociopath. I'm saying I agree with you in the standpoint of human relations, but that is a philosophical argument that sociopaths don't care about. The US just bombed Iran.
I agree with you. I agree with you. But again, the wheel turns. And they're not going to always be, I mean, the fundamentals of the US are not the same if you compare from 20 years ago.
That's true.
Everybody agrees that the country as itself, the state, does not have the means to affect its power projection as it did 20 years ago. And it's bound to accelerate exponentially. So at some point, it's going to be difficult to keep that same stance on international norms if you want to survive in international legal system. Again, I agree with you in everything you're saying, but you have to look at it in the long term because we're dealing with nation states here. We're not dealing with units which have an average lifespan of 72, 75, 78 years. You have to look in terms of centuries. And in terms of centuries, nation states, again, some of them rise, some of them prosper, and others die out. They disappear, including empires. So it's this issue that you want to try to, as much as possible, act in such a balanced way that you ensure that you increase your longevity. Let's put it this way, because the nation state doesn't have any friends; it only has interest. What is the number one interest of a nation state? Self-preservation. Not even expanding borders. It may go through a phase of extending borders, but action reaction. Whomever those borders are being extended in terms of at their expense, right? At some point, you're going to have a pushback. Look at what happened with Germany. They had a phase of expansion until at some point they basically found the whole world ganging up against them, and they were reduced to a two-bit state, literally.
Right.
So it's a winner take all. I agree with you, and sociopaths will think like this. Hey, I'm on a roll. Let's keep playing. Let's put those coins in the machine. But sooner or later, you're going to hit a brick wall. So if you don't have the international law to somehow preserve what can still be preserved, you might be completely, reduced. And in that sense, God knows there were options put on the table as Germany's defeat was inevitable. One of them was to bring them back to the age of agriculture. I mean, completely obliterate them. The Morgenthau plan was that. Well, I guess there were some people who thought maybe in terms of norms, that might be going a little too far, right? But the very fact that those options were on the table and being considered tells you everything you know about how Germany had generated such an animosity toward itself that for some people, at least, it became conceivable to completely reduce the country to, almost like down to a biological level, so they could never rise again. Right?
They should have. They should have. Yeah, yes, I'm a hard ass. I'm looking at what Israel is doing. Germany should have. They lost the right to exist for what they were doing as a country. That is,
and that's a good point that you're saying. The right to exist. Nobody has the right to exist. I mean, no nation state has the right to exist.
Of course not.
That is the biggest crock I've ever heard. There's no right to exist.
Thing, right? You have to invoke God
Yeah,
and to get for the right to exist. Yeah. I guess what I mean by that is at a certain point, the state forgoes. Um,
its legitimacy to exist if it
yeah.
acts outside
Yeah.
the purview of implied, let's put it this way, accepted norms of
Yes.
cohabitations as among
Yeah.
nation states.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right. Let's get to Russia. You've indulged me, and I thank you for indulging me on this.
Thank you. Thank
Um,
you.
so it seems that Russia has a new strategy. And that new strategy, it seems that they have been able to increase drone production to a point where they can put out 500 to 700 drones a night, a night. And you think to yourself, Donald Trump is sending 10, 10 Patriot systems to Ukraine. And it's like, okay, but what does that do when they send 720 hypersonic missiles in one night? And by the way, they've been doing this night after night after night. Here's another one with Kimzal's hitting their targets in waves. What the hell is that? What the hell is that? Right here. Kimzal's hitting their targets, and you can see them coming through the sky. I mean, this stuff is astonishing. Or maybe it's this one right here. If you look, you can see the strikes coming through the atmosphere almost with like split seconds. All of these are hypersonic missiles that are hitting their targets. You press a button and something is destroyed in a few minutes. Is this a new strategy? I mean, am I getting that right when I say this is somewhat of a new strategy that Russia is going with? They've been able to produce so many I think they call them Joran 2 drones, that they can now fire these things pretty much anytime, anywhere, at anything, in swarms in a way that air defense is meaningless.
Hmm. Yeah, it's called overwhelming their defense systems.
Yeah.
It becomes overwhelming. And so whatever, it's not a couple of a few Patriot missile batteries that are going to change anything. They're just basically taking over the sky of Ukraine in such a way that uh, you're left speechless. I mean, like you said, 500 drones per day.
That's
I mean, I
astonishing.
don't know how much Ukraine had to employ itself a few weeks back when they sent, I think it was 500 of them, but one time they did it one time,
Yeah.
over the Moscow regions and other regions as well. But here you're talking about 500 drones per day. So it's yeah, basically anything that's remotely of military value, logistical nodes, anything that enables Ukraine military to function is going to be systematically pulverized.
Is this a new
I call
norm?
it the big downgrade. They are ramping up the downgrading
Yeah.
to such degrees that we haven't seen before. And the
This is
Giron are really good at that. They're
yes, they
cheap
are.
to make. Yeah.
And they're making, from my understanding, 500 a day, meaning they can do this every day in perpetuity because the number that
Mm.
they're producing equals the number that they're using. Am I
That they
getting
can
that right?
deploy. Yeah, no, you're right. That's what Mark Sloboda actually discussed. No, that's
Yeah.
where we're at now. So, I mean, that's why we get Trump saying those stupid things, over the telephone, because they don't know what to, they add their wits hands. They don't know what to do.
Yeah.
It's like it's almost as pure as mathematics. You do not produce, you don't have the industrial base to keep up. And so war making is all about having the industrial base to keep, the intensity to such degree that at over time, one of the protagonists just basically waves the white flag. And this is where we're in that phase now. And since basically we don't seem to see above and beyond the humanitarian aspect of the Istanbul cycle of talks on the merit or on the more what I call the substantive issues bearing on NATO membership and all that. There's no discussion going on right now, and the U.S. seems to have somewhat decided not to really be helpful on this. To the extent they might have said at some point, okay, yeah, let's call it a day. So it's on more than it's ever been before.
Well, it's fascinating to me because it seems like Russia's finally realized either Trump is not in control of his government or Trump is a flagrant liar, and it's probably both. So why are
Probably
we?
both. Yes.
Yeah. So why are we negotiating with this clown? Let's just get this over with. Meaning we're going to win this on the battlefield. We're not messing around anymore in regards to
That's it.
negotiations. Is that fair to say?
It's completely fair to say. Although, there's always, obviously, the door's always open, for talking. I mean, look, Macron called for the first time in 3 years. The Kremlin took the call. And they stayed on the phone for 2 hours. Even though, if you remember, the circumstances of the last phone call before, where all the, and that's another international norm that, that when it was revealed what Macron had done, revealing the content of conversations, diplomatic content, and laughing about it with his collaborators, in the Élysée Palace. I think the whole world around people, at a certain level, were really dismayed of that, and it was even gawky as far as the profane are concerned.
Right.
So that's another norm right there. Like you would not, execute an emissary, someone who's on a diplomatic mission, has some kind of immunity. Even if he's not an ambassador, he's an envoy. You don't kill an envoy.
Right.
So there you go. Another
Why
example.
would Putin even take that call, by the way? Europe is, I find them to be a pointless endeavor. They're radically weak. They have no hard power to speak of. They're vassals of the US state. What is the point of letting these people posture and preen when they're just peacocks? There's no substance to any of that stuff. Macron got beat up by his wife, for God's sake, who the people questioning whether it's even a woman. Why on earth is Putin wasting their time with a battered husband?
Yeah, but the battered husband, alleged battered husband.
He got hit. We saw him get hit.
No, they were horsing around. It was horsing around.
Whatever. Whatever.
But it turns out that it turns out that this guy is, for better or for worse, the head of state of France. So you have to work with what you got.
Right.
And so to the extent this guy is calling you, for the first time in 3 years, of course you gotta take the call. I mean, what does that hurt you? It doesn't hurt you. You can probe him, because those calls are recorded. So then there are, people whose job it is to analyze every single fragment of the conversation, the pauses, the hesitations, the tonality of the voice, you name it, the decrypting of the language used. See what?
But he has no power. Like, meaning there's nothing that...
Well, he has the power to be eventually a nuisance within the collective West, because this guy is, if you understand his psychological profile, you will quickly gather that he's someone who enjoys the limelight. He doesn't want to be a second fiddle to anybody.
Right.
So if you can flatter him in a way, in a very subtle way, that might be of use for you down the road, right?
But, okay, maybe...
You have to cultivate people.
Maybe I'm a hard ass. And I'm beginning to realize I am much more...
The subtlety of international relations. It's it's an art. It's an art form.
But over and over again, any relationship with Europe, whether it was the Minsk Agreements 1 and 2, whether it was Macron leaking that phone call, whether it was Europe preening for the last 3 years, They have been given money, materials, and weapons in order to kill Russians on a battlefield in a war that Russia never wanted. Why is Russia? Okay, okay. I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna beat that.
Well,
Maybe
because
I'm just
Russia
more.
is gonna have to live with those countries as they've lived with them for centuries prior. I mean, those people that you are referring to, Macron and all the others, they're gonna be here for a little while. You know, at the scale of a bilateral relationship between countries, those are just mere moments. So you
And it would
cannot,
be.
this is what Roland Dumas, former foreign minister of François Mitterrand for 10 years, once told me when I had the chance to meet him. Says you never want, rule number one of diplomacy within international relations, you never want to sell out the tomorrow. You don't know what tomorrow will be like. And so you never want to burn bridges, ever. That's rule number one. And don't let personal grievances or irritation get in the way of, such principle. And so the Russians, or should I say the Russian establishment, is a very educated, trained, experienced, savvy outfit. And they understand every subtlety about international relations, probably more than any one of their counterparts, maybe except maybe the Chinese,
Yeah.
who for in their own style also have this long lasting understanding the long term. It's all about the long term, the long view. And so yes, so you take every opportunities you can to explore the possibilities. That's what it's all about, exploring the possibilities. And every day brings its own sets of surprises and opportunities which can be exploited if you're savvy at the game. It's an art form. But if you adopt this dichotomy, black and white, good versus evil, Bush Jr. Or Reagan, rhetoric, yeah, you're going to amputate yourself of a lot of things. I mean, if you start saying to your would be interlocutor that he has no he has no legitimacy to even express his own point of view because he's X, Y, or Z. That might be problematic on the road. Yes.
But they have been seeding their societies with Russian hatred. Not even communists, Russian hatred. They have spent the last 3 years coming up with one way or another to destroy the Russian state. And they are right now given weapons in order to kill Russians. It wasn't a war that Russia wanted. Russia wasn't seeding its people with hatred of Europeans. I mean, hell, Putin was kind of more, you know, an Atlanticist in some level, or at the very least, a European. What's the word I'm looking for? Was more open to Europe, and so was Medvedev. All of these people were open to relationships with Europe. It was Europe that provoked this war. It was Europe that blew off the any kind of deal that could be made. It's Europe that has been seeding its population with hatred of Russia and Russophobia. So I'm not being a hard ass in that sense. I'm pointing out that these are the people that have been doing this for the last several years. And these are the people that are right now doing everything in their power to kill as many Russians as they possibly can and planning the destruction of the Russian state. How am I wrong?
Yes. No, you're not wrong at all. But at the same time, look at what cost those policies are being carried out. They've completely obliterated, hollowed out what remained of their industrial base. Their economy is in tatter, to quote von der Leyen. Their own population hate them. Notwithstanding the Russophobia, their own population are paupers now. I mean, they're paying, inflation has trebled across the whole spectrum. Are people in those countries better off out of those, because of those policies? I doubt it.
But Arnold, that's not the way I think. I don't look as an American. Trump often makes these arguments. oh yeah, I know it's bad for us, but China's getting it worse. And I'm like, why do I care about what happens to China? I care about what happens to Americans. And
Yeah.
I don't care if every European is making $2 an hour as a result of what they're doing to the Russians. It matters more of what they're doing to Russia, if that makes sense. Like, it's not about them being paupers and them hating their leadership. It's about the number and the casualties that were associated with the war that they provoked. Look, when I was working at Sputnik, it took me a while to fully grasp what was happening. And when I finally did grasp it, I was floored. I was just shocked by the whole thing. I was like, these sociopaths provoked a war that never needed to happen. And going by William Burns' note back to 2008, where William Burns is like, you are going to provoke a war by pushing NATO membership on Ukraine in a way that Russia doesn't want, but it is happening on their borders, so they would have to get involved in either way. Meaning, going all the way back to 2008, they knew this was going to provoke a war, and they did it anyway. And now you get like 1 million Ukrainians dead. You might get what, 100,000, 200,000 Russians. That's outrageous. And so when I'm listening to Macron make that phone call, I'm like, why am I ever picking up that phone call from this sociopath, this degenerate human being that has gotten all of these people killed? And maybe Russians are better than I am. Fair enough. I mean, I accept that their diplomacy goes beyond this personal ire that I guess I feel about them doing this. But I'm getting sick of these countries initiating these wars that are purely for geopolitical interests, and then having this, let's say, media machine might in the West that then lies about it, whether it's in Israel, whether it's against Iran, or whether it's against Russia. They are creating a fantasy reality that all of these other countries have to somehow grapple with. And Russia is one of those countries that has enough power to tell them to F off, but they don't do that. They will be very diplomatic and they would sit there and talk to Macron for 2 hours, even though they know that Europe was the one that provoked this war. It is aggravating to me. That's all. I'm just aggravated. Um, do you believe that Europe is looking for a war within 5 to 10 years?
Well, that seems to be the plan, yes. If we look at their statements, their adopted policies, obviously they're going for a doubling down strategy, right? They're still, it's like trying to get out of the hole. What do? You dig a bigger hole, deeper hole. I guess they're assuming that by 2030, Vladimir Putin, if we go by the constitution of the Russian Federation, won't necessarily be in power anymore, and by then they hope to be able to have to compare favorably in terms of the industrial output is concerned.
Yeah.
And try to go for another try, try to exploit also the possibilities of activating fifth columnists inside the countries. They haven't given up on that. It's a long-term goal, not of the European puppets, but of the deeply seated interest, in the West. Yes, they want Russia dismantled. It's a very long-held objective, and they count on grabbing those resources, buying themselves a new lease on life. As far as their development, their model of development, so that they can regroup, retool, and prepare to go after the final domino, which is China. That is how they look at it. Yes. So, but tomorrow is never set in stone. So you don't know. You don't know what's going to happen. No, can they even last until 2030 under current circumstances? I'm not so sure about this.
That's a good question. That is a very good question. Yeah,
they're sowing the branch on which they're sitting. And so I don't know. It's a game of will in the end. It's a game of you have to stay put. You have to remain focused. but you also have to remain flexible, and you have to exploit any opportunities, advantage, of which there can be initially minute versions of, but that can turn out to make to be a game changer. When you look back at the sequence itself, sometimes entire event hinge on small details, minute details, which you never overlooked, which initially at the time you almost mechanically by the book, took into consideration, and in a way exploited to your advantage, and it turned out to have been, the grain of sand in the machine.
Is it fair to say that the Western system, how can I say this? That one of those grains of sand that may make the difference in all of this is what seems to be an incompatibility of systems with the Russian system being stronger. And just to explain what I mean by that, the US makes all of these expensive weapons. It's a capitalistic system that cares more about the capitalism as opposed to what it's supposed to be doing, meaning it's not building something for what it does. It's building something because it makes money off of it in building it, in which case you have these high-priced weapon systems that seems to be ill-suited to modern warfare, whereas Russia is building systems, especially for the context of the warfare that it's fighting, that is perfectly suited, that is inexpensive, and is very effective, and is able to do it in numbers that dwarf all of Europe and the US combined. And these two systems are colliding in Ukraine, and it's becoming clear that the Russian system is able to maintain what it's doing. I mean, for God's sake, it's producing 500-600 drones a day, and is using 500-600 drones a day. Like, that is an astonishing number of air raids that are constantly this barrage, this daily barrage, that obviously air defense becomes pointless in the system. The amount of money that it costs for THAAD, or the amount of money that it costs for Patriots, these missile systems are very expensive. There's no way that you can use them day in and day out to take down 500 drones. That's assuming they even work to take down the drone in general. Like, are we seeing, I guess, doctrines of war collide, and the Western doctrine don't seem to be up to snuff in this?
Well, I've failed to see what the Western doctrine is, to be honest, except lining up the pockets of people at the most high-profile manufacturing, weapons manufacturing companies. I mean, look at the waste. Even if we look at the 1 trillion DoD budget, a lot of it is going to be disappearing in holes that you have no idea what it's all about. Yes. Because fundamentally, you don't need that much money to preserve your interest as far as your national security is concerned. But now, to the extent...
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm just trying to point out, that's kind of the point that I'm making. That is not the way Russia funds its wars or fights its wars. That is the way.
Russia will decrease its military budget for the upcoming budget year, I think, by 5%.
Yeah.
Because you don't need that much. You don't need to spend $1 trillion. What for? It makes no sense. So unless the idea is to create this permanent war state of war with the world, the entirety of the world, that's not sustainable.
Yeah.
Every entity that has attempted to do such, to pursue such follies has been smashed to smithereens. That's on the record, historically.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the US has managed to elicit such loathing and hatred against itself. I mean, it's a brand, right? They're trying to sell themselves as a brand worldwide, and they've accomplished the exact opposite. So you've given your perceived enemies right there a fantastic tool to mobilize their own population against you. So I don't understand. Makes no sense. It's almost like whoever is teaching at the war college these days, has completely abandoned the classics.
Oh, but
Would
see,
have
that's
a
the rub.
bunch of guys in suits, yeah,
In
just
the U.S., the military, when you talk to people who are in the military, they would say, "Look, this is not us. This is the political space." They
yeah,
would
it's
say that
never the
there's a
same.
clear
I know.
difference between the two.
I don't know. I can't imagine that the whole higher brass at the Pentagon is completely feeling like destitute, like there's nothing they can do. I mean, at some point, it's all if it's about. I mean, those people have kids, right? They have expectations for their kids and grandkids. At some point, the temptation is to think, this is not viable. This is going to lead us into the wall. And
I know that.
so, they also basically are sworn to protect the Constitution against foreign and domestic enemies. So maybe they should coup certain people or, whoever. It's feasible.
Doesn't work that way
It's
here.
feasible.
It
They
just
should
it
coup.
doesn't work that way here. Like the military space is attached to the political space and follows the will of the president. Period. And so, whatever feelings they may have about whether it's a good idea to blow something up or attack something or something to that effect, they are subordinate to political interests. And so, it's not the military asking for $1 trillion, it's Trump that's asking for $1 trillion. And to make it more plain, each of the political districts has something being built by military. And so if you cut the military budget, you're pulling money away from certain districts, which various Congress members don't want. That's what I mean when I say political systems. Like this is the way our political military system runs. It's more so on a capitalistic rationale for it, not in sense of use value. Like for example, if I'm in Russia, I say, okay, I need $80 billion a year for the military. And I'm like, all right, we're gonna make these weapons. We're gonna make them for this amount. We're not trying to gouge. We're making them for what they cost. They're going to be inexpensive. They're going to be effective. And meaning you have a very concise, efficient system for determining what you need and to expand upon what you need. And it's based upon your needs. That's not the way it really works here. I mean, they built the F-35. The thing works half of the time. And it's like, okay, you spent how much money to do that? Like an astonishing sum of money to build that plane. Even though, and there were other planes where the military wasn't even
Osprey.
asking for.
And the
Yeah.
Osprey. Remember the Osprey? 2 billion
Uh-huh.
for the Osprey to people. It was a flying coffin.
That's my point. Like it's different. Like the political system is fused with this kind of capitalistic intent. And I guess that's what I'm asking. Are we seeing the failure of this from the standpoint of the West? Like
Well,
we
yeah,
don't
because you're not
need
even trying to build the most performant systems. If
exactly.
at least you were applying yourself to create, state-of-the-art system, but you're not. So where's all that money going? And you're referring to a lot of districts relying on U.S. military procurements contract. But what's being built next to that? Nothing. I mean, over the last 20 years alone, we look at the infrastructure is collapsing. There's no money for anything but for the contractors.
Yeah.
So whoever is benefiting from the system, it's a shrinking pool of people. Every single year is shrinking and shrinking. There's nothing. The American dream, it's only working for them.
I think
Even
we
if we
end
use
where
that, so it's an anthropic process. It cannot last. It's impossible.
yeah. I think we end where we began on this notion of, countries should behave a particular way because at some point those countries are not going to be leaders. And I think we're seeing this with the US. And I get the sense that it
Well,
is
that's an interesting point that you're making here, because here you're talking about what happens when you behave like this abroad, i.e. the imperial mindset. You
yes.
tend to re-import the way you treat natives out there. You bring that back home. We see it with the way not only the police departments across the countries, but some of the military as well has been sent out to for externship and workshops with their counterpart in Israel.
Hmm.
And so any kind of law enforcement, mechanism, techniques of subjugating a suspect, this has been brought back into the streets of LA and New York with, terrible consequences. We're far from, Mr. Friendly policeman from the 1950s, to the extent that ever existed. But I'm saying today, you have those
Yeah.
kind of, you get swatted for nothing today. And those
Yeah.
guys look like RoboCops. I mean, Paul Verhoeven was really onto something when he did that movie. He was a visionary because he knew where we were going with the corporatization of law enforcement. So,
Machine
but
Man.
yes, Machine Man. Or Starship Trooper. The Starship Trooper.
Yeah.
See, the whole world population are a bunch of bugs. We gotta find the main bug. There's no
Yeah.
main bug. It's in your mind.
Yeah,
It's in
those
your
people are
head.
terrifying.
Your deluded mind.
Those people are terrifying. Arnaud, man, thank you for this. I really do appreciate it. I appreciated this conversation deeply. I really did. Arnaud Develay, he's author, political analyst, and international lawyer specializing in international criminal law. His book, Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of the American Political Consensus. You be safe, man. Have a good one, okay?
Thank you, Jamal. Thank you,
All
sir.
righty.